Hello and welcome to Mountain Climbers. I'm incredibly humbled and honored to have the president of Evangelistic Outreach and my pastor, Dr. Calvin Ray Evans, as my guest today. So, anyone who knows Cal knows that he's had a tremendous impact on this community, this country, and quite frankly, the world. But what I think I'm most excited about this episode is this fact. I think we all have a tendency, and I'm guilty of doing this too, at looking at our pastors and forgetting that they're people too. They've had pasts. They've climbed mountains just like the rest of us. And those mountains have given them wisdom and discernment. And they share that wisdom and discernment every time they step behind the pulpit. And we get to glean from that knowledge and that experience that they have. And I know I'm so thankful for that. And when I got to talk with Cal at Evangelistic Outreach and hear him share his journey, I learned things about him that I never knew. And it just makes me admire him and respect him that much more. And I know you will too. And I have absolutely no doubt that Pastor Cal's story will encourage you and inspire you, that when you've climbed and you've climbed and you've climbed and you don't feel like you can climb anymore, you don't think you can make it to the top of your mountain, you don't think you can be used, well, you'll see through Pastor Cal's words that you can be used. The same strength, that powerful strength that sustains and uses Pastor Cal can and will use and sustain you. Pastor Cal, thank you so much for being on Mountain Climbers.
Thank you so much. It's my privilege.
Well, the honor's all mine, and I'm really excited about this because I think a lot of people just see you as a pastor and evangelist, and when they come to you for prayer and encouragement, and they forget that you have a past that brought you to where you are now, and you've climbed mountains just like the rest of us, and so I can't wait for you to share the wisdom and just those golden nuggets that you've gotten from climbing those mountains.
Thank you so much.
You're
my
welcome.
privilege.
You're so welcome. So, the first thing I want to ask you is, I've always enjoyed you talking about your growing up years and your family. So, you have a lot of siblings. So, where are you? Are you like the oldest, middle, baby?
I'm the youngest son.
Okay.
But I have one sister younger than me, and Mom and Dad had 7 children altogether. So I'm the baby boy.
Okay, well, see, I am the baby of my family. It's a fun club to be a part of, so you get spoiled just a little bit. So
birth order is important.
Exactly. So, I just learned something about you that totally boggled my mind, and that was your parents weren't always Christians, and I just thought you were always surrounded in faith. So I would love for you to share their conversion story and how that just changed the course of your family's life.
Sure. Mom and Dad both had never attended church because their parents had never attended church.
Yeah.
They weren't anti-gospel or anti-church. It's just the life that they were raised in.
Yeah.
Both were born at the beginning of the Depression.
Yeah.
So their early years of their life was spent trying to survive, for lack of a better word. And they, of course, didn't intentionally leave God out.
Yeah.
It's just it wasn't part of their routine.
Yeah.
And they chose different paths of life to go. Dad had been very blessed with a good job at a young age because coming out of the Depression, there's a lot of industry expanding. Yeah. So he had hired into a good job. But in addition to that, he played music. Okay. And he played music in nightclubs.
Oh, wow.
And so he worked,
yeah,
but then played music. And really, the music supplemented a lot of their income.
Yeah.
So I need not tell you how church was at conflict with that.
I'm sure it was.
And with that, they just never gave any thought to it until they started having children. Yeah. And when they started having children, there was a large revival that, they used to have protracted meetings that would break out. It wasn't just 3 or 4 days, or it wasn't a week. Yeah. It would go on for weeks sometimes. And a large revival had broken out in the community beside of the community they lived in. And Mom was getting weary of taking care the kids by herself, dad working of the day, all weekend long in the nightclubs playing or playing different venues. And so she told him that she had heard about this revival. They didn't even know really what it was or what it was all about. But she knew there had to be a change in their family. Sure. And she told Dad, she said, I'm not going to stop you from doing what you're doing, but I'm not going to be part of this. I don't know what this is all about, but I'm going to this revival and I'm going to find out. Dad went to the nightclub that night, played during the break between their sets. He told the band that he was with that would be his last night. And he said, I don't know what it is, but they have this thing called a revival. We're going to go see what it is. And of course, he went to that revival, didn't know a Bible verse, didn't know anything to speak of. He couldn't have quoted John 3:16. And he knew about work, but he didn't know about the Lord. And he actually went forward 3 nights in a row. And with going forward 3 nights in a row, people used to ask him continually, you mean it took you 3 days for God to save you? He said, no, it took me 3 days to get to the place that I let God save me because I didn't know what I was looking for. But those 3 days allowed him to talk to his parents. And his parents then, he told his dad, after 2 nights of doing that, he said, I feel like I'm looking for a needle in a haystack. And the haystack gets bigger and the needle gets smaller. And he said, I'm not going back anymore. And his dad said, well, you can't do that. My grandfather told him, said, you need to go back. And he said, well, what do you care? You don't go. So the end result was Grandma and Grandpa went too. They both were saved. Mom and Dad were baptized with our grandparents. Just several months ago, someone brought us a picture. We didn't even realize that they'd been baptized together till someone brought this wonderful picture from the 50s of where that they of course was saved, and that changed the whole outcome of our family from that time forward. Everything in their life changed.
Do you remember how old you were?
I wasn't born yet.
You weren't born yet?
Yes.
Okay.
I had some of my siblings had already been born. That was back in the 50s. So I was born after that. So on my part of the siblings and the family, I was raised, they were Christians during that time.
Well, I mean, what a cool heritage you have.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
yes. I'm reaping what I did not sow.
That's so fascinating. And then after your dad got saved, the Lord put on his heart to open evangelistic outreach. So how did that happen? What prompted him to want to help not only this community, but the world?
Right. He was called into the ministry a couple of years after his conversion, and he immediately, people started calling him for services, and he would go to service, and then they would say revivals would break out. God would send down revivals. You maybe go for one Sunday and be there for 2, 3, 4 weeks. Some of his meetings would actually move from one church to another as a protracted meeting. He had some meetings that started on New Year's Eve and didn't close out till Easter Sunday night. So it'd be 13 weeks straight of revival. Well, the first revival that he had held in a protracted meeting was about 6 weeks. He'd gone there for just a short meeting, and people continued to be converted, and the meeting kept growing in size. Well, at the end of that meeting, they received an offering, and they gave him a check for $250, which was a lot of money then. And he didn't feel right taking the $250 because he worked a job of the day and was going to church of the night. So he received this offering, and then he was contacted by a local radio station, which was a more powerful station in the country at that time. So he took the $250 and paid as long out as it would pay on a radio program. From that radio program came other radio programs. Before you know it, by the end of the 60s to early 70s, he had launched into television. At that time, there was only 3 stations in our area. So he was on one of the 3 stations. And from that then, it launched out to where there was more stations across the nation, which eventually led to an opportunity to go overseas. When he went overseas on the first mission trip to Jamaica, then that opened the doors for all of the mission work from there. So it all launched out from one offering that he just took the offering and used it to try to try to expand the gospel of Christ to others.
And it, like, I know you said it was a big offering back then, but like looking back at it now, like, look at that, like how God blessed that small amount.
Yes, a small church that had been blessed with a great revival was really responsible, not even knowing it. But that's how we know God's in it.
Yeah,
it's always so good we couldn't have thought of it ourselves.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And you know, not only your dad had an impact in the Christian community, your mom did too. And so I'm curious, the impact that they had, and you know, because you know they were Christians and had a strong faith, did that help you see your need for salvation?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, their love for that, the Lord was first in everything in their life, from raising their family to when Dad worked a job. Eventually, it got so there wasn't a lot of full-time ministries at that point because churches didn't have the money for full-time ministries. And through time, that all started to grow, especially during that revival era of time, because it became more of a pull to be full-time, which eventually left him at a point, you know, he was holding 30, 35 revivals a year, working a job, raising a family. We also had a farm, we had an orchard that we took care of. A lot going on. So he had to make, a lot of times people say, well, how do you know whether to go into that? And I've always followed the pattern that he had taught. Really, you don't have to decide. It decides for you. God puts you at a place where you have to make a choice. I can't do this any longer. I've got to do something here in my life or else let my ministry go. And that's what happened with him.
Okay. And you know, like, I don't think I've ever heard your salvation story. I would love for you to share it.
Yeah, I was actually in a revival that Dad was preaching. My father didn't have good vision. He wore glasses all of his life. And we learned as children that you know, if Dad would put his glasses on, he could see back to the back of the church. If he took his glasses off, he couldn't.
Very smart.
So I was under tremendous conviction. So we were in this crowded church, and he asked if people needed prayer if they hadn't come forward to raise their hand. Well, I did. And thinking that my dad didn't know it was me because his vision, and of course he knew all along. But him and Mom were wise. They never said anything to me. They knew the Lord was dealing with my heart.
It's very wise.
And through that, then, of course, 2 or 3 nights later, I came to know the Lord, and then Dad, of course, had the opportunity to baptize me.
That's awesome.
And that was always a trait of Dad when his kids were baptized to carry us out of the water.
I'm sure.
That was his memories.
So, Cal, I gotta ask this. Were you a rotten boy?
Oh, definitely. Very much so. Very much so.
Right.
Big change when the Lord came in.
All right.
Yeah.
So I can't see that, but so I just had to ask.
No. I think change is a key element of salvation. It makes bad people good and good people better. There's always some type of a change.
Exactly.
And the first miracle that Jesus performed that we have recorded was changing something, water into wine, and he changes lives. And with that change, that's an evidence to us that we already know we're saved, but it's a greater witness to us of the change that's there.
You know, so here's your dad. He is a well-known and respected, you know, preacher and evangelist in the area. So did you ever feel that was expected of you to walk in his footsteps?
Oh, most definitely. I think people they don't mean harm. They just look at you and say that's the role that you'll probably fit into. But what people don't understand is that you see both sides of that role. And that's why I've always been very cautious of ever telling somebody, I see this in you. Because it has to be a personal commitment. Just like we have a personal relationship with Christ for our salvation, we have to have a personal commitment to God for our calling or the direction that God leads us in.
And I've heard you say that from the pulpit many times. I will never look at you and say, oh, I think you should be a missionary. I think you should be a preacher. And, you know, I definitely respect that because, you know, that kind of puts, you know, like you said, pressure and, you know, like, then you kind of like go back and forth. Well, is it my own unique calling or is it someone telling me to? And so how did you know when God started calling you?
Definitely. I made a critical mistake. I made the mistake that I was going to tell God what I was going to do. And with the ministry, I saw both sides of the ministry. Dad had pastored, Dad had evangelized, and I knew the pressures that was there with all of that, especially faith ministry. And with that, I loved what my dad did, what my mom did. I was thrilled, but I determined that I could be more beneficial to the work of the Lord if I told God I would never preach. And if I told God, I'll make money and I'll take money to help those that do. So great love for it, great respect for it, but I thought that would be the self-justification to say, no, Lord, thank you. I'm not interested.
It reminds me of that saying, God laughs at our plans.
Yes. In the end, he's in control.
So, how did you feel when you finally accepted the call to preach and knew, this is what God has for me to do on this earth?
I compare it a lot to just like a person when they're converted and they come to the realization that their sins have truly been forgiven by Christ. A load that lifts. It's that same way with decisions, direction of God and calling and leadership of God in our lives in ministry. It's like a load lifts off of you. It's a relief. You don't know where you're going. You don't know the end results, but you have a peace. And any time that people are searching for answers, I always remind them, the greatest thing God gives us sometimes, instead of a yes or a no, or do this or don't do that, he gives us peace. Because that's the one thing that the world can't give us, that the devil can't give us, nobody else can give us. Peace. Jesus said, peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. So sometimes we have a hard time accepting by faith. Peace is the answer. And that's what you have. You have a peace.
I totally agree with that. And, so after you did accept the call to preach, did you immediately start working here in Evangelistic Outreach?
Not immediately.
Okay.
When I first started, doors started opening. Then when I had graduated from high school and was in Bible college at the same time, attending a secular college and a Bible college at the same time, day and night, trying to preach too, get through work on the side to pay the bills. But through all of that, then little by little, I started working with the ministry. So by 78 and 79, I was almost just field evangelist, working with the ministry, raising support for the ministry, doing what I could, because it's hard for us to understand people will support a ministry. Sometimes people feel like support the man, support the woman. But the man or the woman will leave, but ministry stay. So when you start supporting the ministry instead of the man, then you have a legacy that's there. That's why Dad has the legacy. He always directed it to the ministry. Because we're here for a little while, we're gone. We don't like to think that. But real ministry will go on beyond the individual's lifetime. They'll be like Moses. They'll see the land that they may not be able to enter into. But still they died with a vision. And that's how we need to die as well. That's why you talk about mountain climbing. He got to the top of the mountain. He saw things that he didn't get to enter into right then. Later he did at the Mount of Transfiguration, but he didn't get to enter it right then.
I think that is so profound.
So it's just one of those things that we have to have. Our vision needs to extend further than our life.
That's great advice. Well, if that doesn't help anyone else, it helps me. So I thank you for that. That is great. So a lot of people might not know this, or maybe they do. But you were actually the pastor for RCC in the early 80s.
Yes.
How did the doors open up for that to happen?
I had preached the church camp different years for Rubyville, and they were without a pastor at that time. Brother Crace had left. I was very close to Brother Crace. And I'd known him all of my life because he and Dad had worked meetings together and pastored in the same community at one point. And when he had left, it left a void in the church for the need of a pastor. And I had held 2 or 3 of the youth camps, church camps. We had called it church camp at that time. And through that time, some of the deacons began to feel the need to request if I would consider the idea of coming to the church.
Yeah.
So I was actually getting ready to go overseas for about 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I'll pray about it. When I get back, I'll give you an answer. You pray about it. We'll see where we're at. So about 2:30 in the morning, out at the church camp, that's what I told Howard Richard at that time. And he said, I'll talk to the other deacons. We'll pray about it. And you pray about it. And I actually went to Guyana, and I was there for 3 weeks. When I came back, then that's when I told him, I said, I feel a liberty to go to the church. So the things progressed from there. So by September of that year, I came in on the first Sunday of September as the official pastor of the church.
That's awesome. Now, you were really young, weren't you?
Yes, 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I know you got married young, but still practically a newlywed, and
Yeah, had one child.
Yeah.
Candy was expecting our second child when we came to the church.
It was a very exciting season in your life with a lot of unknowns, probably.
Yes, absolutely.
Too.
Absolutely.
So I mean, was it nice to kind of have that like stability at such a young time with marriage and kids?
Yes, it was, and then also there was a lot of instability, not on the church's part, but on my part. I mean, I'm in a new area that I don't know anything. Even though no matter what anyone tells someone, to be under somebody is not the same as filling the role then of pastor.
Yeah.
You think you know before you do it, but then you need to be taught. You need to be helped. You need guidance, and that's why leadership in a church is so important.
Yeah.
When a pastor works together with leadership and leadership works with the pastor, it was not only a time in my life of change, of good change, but also it was a time where I was able to be taught from others in an area that, and I know that sounds strange coming from a minister's home, but you don't pay attention to those things. You were raised in a deacon's home. But still, you don't know all the business behind the scenes, the battles that they fight and the things they go through. We're sheltered from that. So now here we are in this new position. But when people lovingly take you and let God use them to help mold you, then that's what makes the impact in your life. So definitely it was a great learning experience for me. And it removed a lot of that instability because I didn't know where I was at. I didn't know what I was doing. I was young.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah, I had a family. Didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. So probably then a few years later, my understanding is that you stepped down to go into full-time evangelism with your dad. So that stability was kind of gone. But how did you know that God was shifting your ministry focus from pastoral to evangelism?
At that time, working with most churches, churches were a little more demanding in meetings. They wanted Sundays through the week.
Yeah.
And you cannot pastor and not be there on Sundays.
Yeah.
And and what happened, it became a driving force. The pressure was there, and I felt like that it was best for the church. Not so much even in my selfish desire, I just wanted to study.
That's true.
But I couldn't do that and do justice to the church at the same time because, as the meetings kept coming and one meeting led to another meeting, and before long, I thought, there's no way that I can do all of that.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, it's probably best. We had just built the first building project there at the church as far as the sanctuary goes. We had just expanded it. The church was full, and everything looked like the right time.
Yeah.
So that was the basis behind it.
Okay, all right. But you got to do a lot of cool things with your dad, especially the places you travel.
Oh, yes.
Could you, expound on that a little bit?
Oh, it's missions outreach is like ministry here. Every country you go into opens the doors for another country.
Yeah.
And the more you do in missions, the more there is to do. Because word spreads. People's in need, and the word of that spreads. So through that, one meeting led to another, led to another, led to another.
Yeah.
But through all of that, before you know it, we're traveling around the world, going a lot of unique places. places that was hard to get into maybe for others at that time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it kept expanding the mission side
Yeah.
of the ministry
Yeah.
and allowed us to get involved with a lot of things where we then were able to start training pastors, getting native pastors, college education to help them, because in a lot of countries, if they don't have a accredited degree, their countries will not allow them to operate in those countries.
Okay.
So we started expanding with our scholarship programs to help them with their training, bringing them here to the U.S., getting training modules overseas. And from that, then that began to expand where native pastors and even missionaries that were there that needed advanced training could get the training that they need. And instead of all the time them coming back here, we started working with colleges and seminaries to send professors there to them in modules to help get the work done. So from that, it started a whole network of a foundation. And then as they trained more native pastors, more native missionaries, more churches were built, more churches were planted, and it just continued to expand.
That's so cool. So, I mean, it's obvious that that was what you were supposed to do during that season of your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's so cool. And, you mentioned, you got to go to some countries that are very hard to get into. Russia being one of them.
Yes.
And I remember you saying from the pulpit that the one time you went, there was a lot of political unrest. So that was tough. But then you got life-altering news.
Oh,
You were there, and that was your brother had passed away. And then you received another blow.
Yes.
Only you or your dad could go home to be with the family. Of course, your dad was going to go.
Yes.
So I can't imagine how painful that would be. How did you cope with that and stay and do what you were, set out to do in Russia without just completely falling apart?
Well, I think it was two things. Number one, we were there with a group of other ministers. There was one of our board members was there with us. The reason why Russia, the USSR was just starting to collapse.
Yeah.
We actually had to go through Czechoslovakia to get in to Russia, which a lot of these countries now, those names and countries don't exist as that anymore. Yeah. But through that time, they were very stringent because they were fearful, even though they were collapsing, they were fearful of Christianity spreading quickly in their country. So they knew they couldn't control it, but they were still trying to control it.
Yeah.
So how they would do that is they would give you visas, and under no circumstance could you return.
Oh, wow.
Well, when we appealed through our embassy, who went to their embassy, the embassy came back and said, under the circumstance, one of you can go, but not both.
Yeah.
Well, I think first of all, the Lord put the right people there with me because I needed that at that time.
Yeah.
And second of all, I tell people there's grace that we have not used or do not understand because we never needed it.
Yeah.
So while I was there, as strange as it sounds, it's almost like you're in a shelter, a bubble. You're held in His hand.
Exactly.
And it's added grace that was there. And actually, the hardship never hit me until I got back to the U.S.
Yeah.
And then when I called my wife from New York to let her know we'd missed one flight, was coming in on a later flight, and I called her and I told her, I just feel drained. I'm just numb. I'm just numb. I'm done.
Reality
I don't know
setting.
what to do. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I just felt empty.
Yeah.
And I know it's not all about feelings, but
you're human.
A brother had died.
Exactly.
He had died under a horrible circumstance. It was suicide. The funeral was over.
You didn't get that closure of seeing
no one was there through any of that, and now here I am stepping back in to the public here.
Yeah.
And on top of that, people were vicious at that time. I actually had people that contacted me and canceled meetings because they would say, how could any preacher stay over there and keep preaching when you had a family member die? What kind of a preacher are you that you wouldn't come home? I couldn't come home.
No.
But yet all of that, they didn't mean harm. but all of that was tearing the wounds open. See? So you're hearing all of these things. You're getting all of this feedback. And all of these things are surrounding you. And you know you weren't there for a lot of things that was transpiring. Our whole world, our family was turned upside down. Everything had turned upside down. But
that's crazy. Would you say for the first time as a preacher and evangelist, you were tempted to quit?
Oh my, yes. Yeah, very much so. You know, you want to go back into that shelter where that you can say, well, I can do something else that's just as important. It's not about me anyway. And I can pull back and do these things. But no one should ever feel bad. God always took me back to Jeremiah, when Jeremiah was at the point that, you know, he just wept until he could weep no more and was so discouraged. And he said, I'll not mention his name anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. He said, but his word was in me as a fire shut up in my bones. And what happens is the seed that's in us, the incorruptible seed, God seems to water at the right time with the right people by the right means. And that sprouts back up into us because we don't know what God is capable of until we get to those places. We know He's God. And we know how great He is in the good time. But it's in the hard times that we really understand the power of His might.
And you know, you mentioned that he brings the right people to you at the right time. And for you, that was Wilbur Crace.
Absolutely.
And Wilbur did something to make sure you didn't quit.
Yes.
It might have seemed harsh to other people, but I've heard you say it was exactly what you needed.
Absolutely.
Can you explain what he did?
Yeah, my wife immediately after I hung up, through that time, when I left the church, there was a pastor there for a short period of time. Then when he left, I was actually doing interim work at the church again. But I didn't feel led to take the church. I still had this schedule. And we knew what was happening. And Wilbur felt a leading to come back. And when he came back, he said, the only way I'll come back is if you stay on board and help me. And I said, I won't take any titles. I won't take any pay. I'll do anything I can to help you on the condition that you pastor my family. And that was the condition. That was the terms that we had. So he would take care of mine. So when I was out traveling, my family was coming to church there under Brother Wilbur. Well, my wife, of course, he's our pastor. So she contacts our pastor. And Wilbur's first wife had died of cancer. And he knew that pain. He had been through the pain of that. The struggling with it. He was pastoring at Rubyville when his first wife passed. And none of us could probably imagine what he was going through with the family. But God's grace had brought him through.
He knew that grace.
So he came with Faye, his wife, and Candy. And there was a group of a couple hundred that met me there late night at the airport. And while it was very thoughtful, it was also very scary because here I'm going to crawl in a hole already, and then you're confronted by all these people. And Wilbur came over to me and said, you're riding with me home. And on the way home, that's when he gave me sound advice. And he said, I was tired, I was weary. And he said, Wednesday night's the next service, you're preaching. And I said, Wilbur, I can't preach. And he said, you're preaching. And he said, yes, you are. I'll not take no for an answer. And then he told me what he had been through. And I wish I could tell you it's a great sermon. It wasn't a great sermon, but it was what I needed at that time to give us the strength to go on. And that's why God sends these people at the perfect time. And through it, I think he was the one that, you know, again, you talk about mountain climbers, but man, when a climber goes before, sets the pins, ties the rope off, to help pull the next one up. It's a help. It's not only us climbing. It's somebody that's already got to the top. That's helping pull us along sometime. And you trust me, Wilbur, the church, our friends, they pulled us out of that by God's grace.
And you know, like it's how you know you can climb and make it to the top by watching other people do the same. And you know, how I see it, I'm curious to see if you see it this way. That action that Wilbur did, he got you back in the pulpit. to me, that was a turning point for you.
Oh, definitely.
To see, like, I can do anything, even if it's extremely painful, if God's the source of my strength.
It was the night that taught me through our weakness, His strength is made perfect.
Yeah. And I think it also opened the door too, that when Wilbur passed away, you stepped in to become the pastor of RCC again. Did you ever think God would place that mantle on you again?
No, I really didn't. You know, but how things had changed because of the strength of the ministry. By that time, I'd already become the director. Dad had become emeritus, so that he could continue traveling, preaching, writing. So I'd become the president of Outreach, and because of the daily grind, there's a lot of contracts. There's a lot of things that goes on, planning for meetings, all of that. It's just a constant grind. And Dad wanted out of that grind to spend the last years of his ministry preaching, writing.
That makes sense.
You know, still taking the trips. Still actively raising funds to help missions and ministry. But at the same time, he knew at a certain age your health starts to decline. So I had taken on that role, and with that, you know, I had no idea how that the other would work. But little by little, it's just like God shifted everything. Until suddenly the nature of the meeting started to turn around to say, hey, you know, you can, I still go out, but you know well from the church, God did that. I didn't do that. God arranged it until Sundays I'm in our pulpit, and Wednesdays, there's very few Wednesdays that I'm not in our pulpit. And some of those were just commitments over the years of churches that I've been to, where I just finished a meeting last week where I preached there 40 years straight.
Oh, wow.
So you know, those few meetings are still there, but yet God arranged all of that to allow me. And then we'd already been blessed to raise up others in the ministry and other ministers that they started carrying some of that load. So the transition became very easy.
That's great.
It really, you know, my second opportunity to step in there, it just happened. Anybody that was part of that will tell you it just happened. It wasn't a thing of voting and doing all these other things. We're not against any of that. That's not. It's just like God just did it. It did it without asking us. He just did it. And we just, maybe it was just through blindness as far as trying to look around and figure things out. It wasn't spiritual blindness. It was just God did it and we just followed. And not even knowing the outcome of all of it.
Well, I mean, you definitely were the man that God wanted for RCC with everything you've done for our church. So there's no doubt about it. He didn't feel like he needed to ask because he knew he needed to be there. So, but you know, I am curious. You know, a lot of men are either full-time evangelists or they're pastoring when they're in ministry. But you do both. Have you ever thought, you know, okay, I need to scale back, especially when your dad passed away and this evangelistic outreach, you were the face of it. Have you ever thought that?
Well, in the early years I did, but not so much now. Because the way that God has arranged things, that it doesn't pull from one another. And I make this clear, the church is a separate ministry from outreach. But what God did in His mercy, He merged us spiritually together. Until now, the face of one is the face of the other. And, you know, that's a remarkable thing because other churches haven't become jealous of what God has done with Rubyville. And at the same time, other evangelists is not jealous of the fact that they can't do what we're doing. But that proves it's God. If we could have figured it out, it wouldn't have been that way. But it allows us to maintain with the support that's there, maintain everything that's going on without affecting each other, and just the opposite. It strengthens one another.
I mean, I think that's biblical and it's how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be unified, one body. So I think that's great. And, you know, it definitely, I mean, with how blessed you are, it shows God's in it and what He's done.
He's been good to us.
He has. But, you know, Cal, I've always wanted on Mountain Climbers to keep it real. to talk about the hard stuff, the painful stuff, because, that's real life. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about it, like we said, it helps people know how they can climb their mountain. Mm-hmm. And you've made no secret to the fact that you've had to deal with a lot of cruel and angry people. You're on the receiving end of a lot of negativity. You've been called by all names. Your convictions have been belittled. I mean, you go and go and go, don't always get a thank you. And, I know you have tough skin, but you're also human.
Sure.
So I'm sure that you've experienced a lot of hurt and pain over the years because of that. So what I want to know is, how have you pushed past that pain and hurt? Just keep on climbing.
Well, it's nothing more than God allowing us to stay focused on the goal. Because if you don't stay focused on the goal, those become distractions to you.
Exactly.
And the most painful part is not when it is targeted at me as an individual.
Yeah.
It is when it's targeted at ministry.
Yeah.
Because then you're targeting it at the Lord.
Yeah.
So what people don't understand is sometimes they think they're tearing down a person, but really they're fighting against the Lord.
Yeah.
Because they have misunderstanding. People will love you as long as you say yes to everything they want.
Yeah.
But life is not filled with all negative. God doesn't say no all the time.
It's true.
But there are times that God tells us no.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to that place that you have to say no, then no longer do they want you as their friend.
Yeah.
They want to attack you.
Exactly.
Through that, God has always allowed me
Yeah.
to start to see what I pray is, Lord, may there come a day, a way, a time where that I can minister to that person.
Yeah.
Because there'll be a time when there'll be a need. And
Yeah.
if you don't let that build to resentment and bitterness, then when that need arises in their life, you're able to minister in love to them.
Yeah.
And that, I don't care what anyone says, that covers a multitude of sin.
Yeah.
That's there. A moment of grace.
Yeah.
A moment of grace is all that it takes.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand, when you say, I believe this, it doesn't mean that I hate you because I disagree with you.
Yeah.
No more than it does telling your child no.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you don't love your child. If your child's 2 years old and you have to say, no, you can't run toward the highway, and your child tries to do it anyway, and you have to take a stand on that.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you don't love your child. It means you love your child so much
Exactly.
that you still have to stand what you interpret to be the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the right thing in that case.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that becomes misinterpreted on the other side of it.
Yeah.
So they perceive you as your enemy. Greatest day in your life is when you begin to understand the devil wants you to see your friends as your enemies, and he wants you to see your enemies as your friends.
Yeah.
Because you embrace the wrong thing and you don't trust the Lord for the wisdom to do it.
Yeah.
So through that, I have found out those that sometimes have fought you the greatest.
Yeah.
God gives you a ministry opportunity
Yeah.
at that moment of grace where you can say, I might have said that, but you remember I love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
In spite of all of that. And therefore, you wind up getting to be the beneficiary of seeing what God does through that person in the end.
Yeah, that's so cool. It makes it all worth it. It definitely does. And, speaking of that, you talked about this, just all the spectacular mountaintop, views that you've seen, it shadows the hurt and the pain.
Oh, yes.
And so, I want to know, and I know your answer is going to be yes, but I still want to ask you this. Has it all been worth it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You can't look back and say you wouldn't change the things on our part where we're wrong.
Yeah.
We would naturally want to change those things. If we don't learn,
when
we learn it all, we should be in heaven.
Yeah, that's true.
But in the rest of it, it's a process that God's teaching us. But in the end, you can't have victories without battles.
Exactly.
And you can't climb mountains without rocks.
Yep.
A stream would never babble without the stones inside of it.
Yeah.
And you cannot climb a mountain without rough places to hold on to.
Yeah.
So in the end, it's worth the view.
Yeah, that's
keep climbing.
That's so true. I love that. And, Cal, as we come to a close here, I want to thank you for, coming on Mountain Climbers. I want to tell you, you're like one of the wisest people I know. You are, definitely. And, I look at you and I sometimes think, oh man, how does he do it all? Like you go and go and go, and when you think you can't go anymore, God gives you the strength, to keep going. You've done so much for our church, this community, and quite frankly, the world. And I know that a lot of ministers and pastors and evangelists, they look up to you. And they want to, be like you and set the kind of example for the generation before them that you have for them. But I can imagine that they might look at you and see and think, how can I have the strength and stamina to do all that he's done? And how can God use me in such the instrumental ways that he's used you? So, to end with this, I want you to kind of disciple them and just tell them that, God can give them the same strength, faith, and trust that he's given you for them to do what God's called them to do.
I think the key to all of that is to always remember we have no strength. Mm-hmm. And the joy of the Lord is our strength. Yeah. And when God puts it in your heart, your mind, your spirit, you have to have a determination that is coupled with commitment. And I always stress this. It is not our abilities. Yeah. It's our ability to work for the Lord. Yeah. And if we want to ever be successful spiritually at anything, it takes work. Yeah. The end result is it takes work. Yeah. And God says, when you're weak, I'll give you strength to do the work. So if you do the work of the Lord and you do it with the right motive for the Lord, not for us, then he'll take care of all the rest. Yeah. He'll give you the strength you don't have, and he'll get the glory that we don't need. Yeah. And when we do that, we don't have to be like anyone. We need to be the best me that I can be for the glory of God. Yeah. God will do the rest of it then. Yeah, that about sums it up. That's perfect. And once again, thank you for being on here. Thank you.
I mean, like I said, you're so wise, and I'm so excited to see what your interview is going to do for others and how it's going to encourage them to keep climbing and see that, they can have a legacy just as well. They might have to climb some mountains, but spectacular views are, just within reach. And I think you're the epitome of this truth. When your strength comes from the right source, there's not a mountain you can't climb.